We are joined right now by 31 people online. I want to welcome you all to the Kenyon Review reading series. This is a very special night, and I have to say it's nice to be able to see you, and it's nice to be able to say that it's nice to see you. It's been a long time. I am very delighted to introduce our two readers. I'm Nicole Teresdet, and I'm the editor of the Kenyon Review. And I will be introducing Cristina Correa and Elinam Agbo, both of whom are Kenyon Review Fellows for 2021. And I have to say, we're so excited to have them, and we're lucky to have them. The fellowship for the Kenyon Review means that they will join us in person on campus. They are part of the English faculty. They're teaching creative writing. They will join us on our editorial team, and they will be working on their own projects while they're here, and they have 2 years. So it's a gift to us, and it's hopefully a really productive and wonderful time for them as well. So first, Cristina Carrera. Cristina Carrera is a writer and educator from Chicago, where she served at-risk and marginalized youth, recovering addicts, artists, and scholars for more than a decade. She has received fellowships from CantoMundo, Hedgebrook Foundation, and VONA Voices, among other honors. Her poetry has been published, broadcast, and exhibited in venues including the Academy of American Poets, Poem a Day series, Missouri Review, TriQuarterly, Obsidian, NPR's Latino USA, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit. Her poem, Reflection from a Bridge, was selected by former US poet Laureate Tracy K. Smith in the Best New Poet series. She holds degrees in creative writing and Latinx studies, and most recently earned an MFA at Cornell University. She is currently at work on her first collection of poems. Please welcome Cristina Carrera.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to know that there are people near and far, so the big hello. Let's jump into a poem. He is disappearing like a ficus that cannot be ushered into its winter by nutrient or chemical. Even with strong hands and low, steady music, they are leaving. Hunger cannot grow here. I try not to imagine cancer as an invasive pest, but as potential that always lived inside and eventually learned to outrun everything that threatened to kill it. They are not so different, my father and the ficus, surviving foreign terrain and their inexpensive lives. He is like a boy when the home visit therapist arrives, like a shooting star's flare nearly observed. She points to the photograph on the shelf above the muted television that blasts Westerns. In full uniform, he is smiling, one side of his mouth suspended in disbelief as the other ascends into his washed out cheekbone. She asks if he was in Vietnam, and he meets her steady eyes, and they will not say another word because it is true. They both awoke once afraid, subject to a war that did not choose them, and fled. I do not know if he killed before he chose not to return, but he did die there in a dying friend's arms that were also his. I want to ask what she left behind and if she ever wants to go back. I clutch the futile orange mist between us. Her hand reaches to command another try. He grips her and lifts his free arm, which seems somehow longer, bone too heavy for the stubborn muscle remaining. He struggles to reach past pain's flame through accelerating inhales. She rests flat palms on his shoulders, exhales deeply, instructing serenity. He learns to be led. And I push the broom, avoiding the planters collecting our sun-blazed dust. So I wanted to start there, which is a very heavy place, but it's a very clear place that I think is a good example of what I would like to do with my work in this moment. And that is really to sit with grief very carefully and find a way out that allows me to go back in. So I hope that there's also some breath and some opening in these pieces that allows for that conversation to happen. They'll be sad, but they'll be hopeful too. So I'll just read a handful more. But before I do that, I also want to take an opportunity to say thank you to a lot of people, but I'll be brief. First, thank you to the Kenyon Review, everyone here who has offered me space to stand here and do this work and share it with you. Especially Nicole Dutton, thank you for inviting me to this space. And to my co-fellow Elinam Agbo for holding space with me. I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm very overwhelmed with excitement. So it feels like a lot, but I'm grateful to share it. So that thank you first, and also very, very significantly, thank you to my loved ones who are watching near and far, who have supported me so fervently and who've allowed for me to be here, who've allowed for me to arrive. I thank you. Bloodletting. Today, I thought about routines and respect. The straw mat that is rolled away or onto itself, the bleached handkerchief shaken and folded into tight corners, a body of men embanked around the shimmering hollow of a lake made to hold the swell of many seasons. It is hard to remember now, paper prayers wrapped in hair, loose pendants, bloody coins, all their purposes, waiting for miracles to. After I foretold the moment, everything changed, but no one listened. This, its own initiation into womanhood. I was named in front of gods and my parents. Lazy, girl child, ingrate, lost, capable of treachery, seer, brilliant, glutton, more powerful than even I, daughter of Chango and Oya, strong as men watch her closely. The smooth spirit black stones I love to hold, ox horns crowned in bright beads, hold coconut shells brimmed with milky water and fleshy bits spit out between prayer. Chalked oracles, pelts and feathers coated in honey and rooster's blood. Cloths dripping embroidered edges. The simply dressed men and their women alerted me to fear, belly aches, and faithlessness. A gourd opened would let loose my entire fortune. The beet stain on my lips would line my insides with clots. Always the remedy of offerings and sacred mystery of debt. Hold out the left hand, start with the right foot in rhythm. Today, I thought about money, that room stacked with overspilling bins and strangers' fumbled formalities. As life becomes for a while a relentless belief, like a man who yells to get his point across. Each instance a creation story. Lips rubbed with the honey-drenched jugular of a guinea fowl. Blade curved down the scalp swift, irritating ends of loose hair stuck to my temples. I dream now in memory of what I wish to rename. 8 arms emptying a floor to divine and prostrate before the truth. No one else saw the red spider mite beaming from the dull shower head emblazoned as a misunderstood siren. Enlightenment appears sudden in a corrosive history. Like the fiery god who maddened himself through a forest into the ocean goddess's abundance. There she held his burden like an anchor until he surrendered his useless thrashing. I waken the nightmare of what has already happened, hold it in my cheek like an eel. The sea is a stew, and Yemaya scalds the back of her spoon to bind her tongue. Eyes, wet knots, remember too much. I keep her gaze and leave behind the sacred myth. She did not open, but was opened. A flight of minor gods fall out easy as rips, oblivious to her cliff dive. In sea dark, I remember the oily shark who invited me to his belly, opened me as I slept and filled me with quiet I couldn't spill. But if innocence is a bare-toothed line, I am gathering its slippery sentences to be spilt and offering them to her at the sand's edge. Here, these thin coins and ripe melon to split through each wave that will stop and start sudden as a cast spell. There, I want to wish upon the raging shells new rhythm against stymied stones. Praise the tide's bursting bounds of sacrifice. I have just a few more pieces, but I want to talk a little bit about this one because, because I just wrote it today and I don't know why I'm reading it really. No, but I wanted to remember what it felt like to visit. I was only able to do that virtually when I was in the application process to come here. And one of the things that was the most enlightening and special about that time was working with the students here at Kenyon, and they were so open to what I was offering them and so willing to go along on the weird ride with me, and it was just really fun and lovely. So I went back to what I wrote alongside them that day and turned it into something that I'm going to share. And I remember the prompt had to do with spring because it was springtime, and we were looking at a poem by Bridget Begin Kelly. And one of the lines that we wrote after was something beyond the report of beauty. So I believe, I don't remember, my notes were not very good. That had something to do with the prompt. So I just sort of went from there. And I say this also to say another thank you to the students that I'm working with now who offer me something very much like what I experienced that day every week. I'm so lucky to work with them and to be here in this place that cares so much about writing. So this something that has microcosm on the top, so I guess that's the title. Your warm waiting finger large as a satellite, a flinch and murmur I pulsated through into the vicarious world. Enough of a soul already to sense you had always been amplified, star in my flesh tomb. And here I could touch you and be touched too, in the room brightly I knew something about filament's fragile spark, pressing to show us to ourselves, our dust, our meteoric delivery, launched into the glistening molecule that grows and dies in me still. Just two more pieces. And like I said before, I'm interested not just in the space where grief goes on, but where grief opens and allows a bit of a window. So these pieces are my windows. Blood thinner. Like osprey beaking trout from a drying lake, there are so many bones. This life keeps fooling me into picking it. I used to be marooned by the swelling question of daylight, splintering through every meaty hope. What to do with its swelling glint? Protect my eyes or let the needle through skin quickly? I don't want to remember my father's craping arm, knotted as a washed up branch. Tentative as a mouth, still wet, I remember another father, resetting a chickadee's wing, then leaving it out on a patch of grass, stunned and beating. And last, my mind is a long song. It must be a bell-strapped bird after all, tapping its rhythms through my sweaty dreams, a tight little seed, a growing signal. Vice grip still nameless in my throat, pink. A night terror taps the storm on my roof. Some old drain pipe releases its heavy steam. What tongue-tied stage is this now, rosy proof? A rotten weed and a miserable sea? An open corridor for breath. The throat is a moment, after all, that I'll miss. Thirsty pebble, unloosed down a narrow passage. Slight quiver before the abyss. A moment, after all, but I'll miss it. Dim exhale, a wind-swept doorway, a moat. What I want is a wing, eager and well-lit. 20 chimes ringing outside my window. Thank you.
Thank you for those poems, Christina. It's impressive to be so quiet and thunderous at the same time. I don't know how you do that. The next writer I'm really excited to introduce is Elinam Agbo. And Elinam, have you heard that Toni Morrison quote? She says something like, "He is a friend of my mind." When we read Elinam's work, that was the impression I had. I was like, she is a friend of my mind. All of this beautiful work. You're going to hear she's going to be reading from her novel that she's working on. Elinam Agbo was born in Ghana and grew up in Kansas. She is a graduate of the University of Chicago and the Helen Zell Writers Program at the University of Michigan, where she co-founded MQR Mixtape, an online imprint of Michigan Quarterly Review. She has received recognition and support from Aspen Words, the Clarion Foundation, and the Hurston Wright Foundation, among others. She is working on her first book, a novel about shape-shifting mothers, which draws upon African diaspora folklore to investigate questions of inheritance, displacement, and memory. Please welcome Elinam Agbo.
Thank you, Nicole, for that beautiful introduction. And thank you, Christina, for opening with those like very I was like mesmerized. And but I was also like meditating, listening to you. And I think that's just like a really fits the night. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'll save the rest of my thank yous for the end. And I'll just jump in. This is the beginning of the novel. We were processed as palm-sized figurines, birdhouse decor shipped in crates. Good luck gifts, wooden and ceramic. We were wrapped in cellophane, one piled on top of the other and covered in styrofoam. Next to a family of laughing kookaburras, my mother and I took the shape of blue macaws. The slaty bristle front sang alongside the tanager, but my mother and I remained silent. While immigration via transfiguration was not new, it was secret, and secret things tend to be unregulated. Side effects included memory loss, disorientation, nightmares, and occasionally death. Best to stay quiet until arrival, my mother said. I didn't know who or what was waiting on the other side. I knew only what I learned from my mother, that he was a graduate student and could not afford to host anyone on an F1 visa, that our arrival had been facilitated by his gracious friends and colleagues who had rallied together and raised money to help cushion our landing. Man was not made to be alone, they said, when they met us at the harbor. We needed housing, and my new father needed love. Could we give him that? Yes, my mother promised. Yes, I echoed. I didn't understand what it meant to love a stranger, so I followed my mother's example. I woke up early to dust, mop, and take out the trash. I ironed my new father's clothes, poured extra strong coffee into his thermos, and settled into my job of assistant cook, making plain omelets for breakfast, rice and spinach stew for dinner. I practiced smiling in the mirror. I collected inspirational magnets from yard sales, stuck them on the fridge, and observed his bright expression when he read them. I learned that he loved roses and tulips, so I doodled the flowers on his lunch bags. In our neighborhood, families roamed the parks together, and we followed suit. My mother and my new father told me to watch the children on their way to school. Pointing at their Mickey Mouse and My Little Pony backpacks in the distance, they would say, "This is your life now. This is what you want. You will learn to live like those children, won't you? Learn to speak and act like they do, until no one can guess that you were ever anyone else." And I would nod and say, "Yes, I will," because nodding alone would not have been enough. My family required all of my will and allegiance to stay whole. It was not a straightforward transformation. I lurked around playgrounds and practiced overheard speech. Dogs snarled when I passed their homes, and I snarled back. When the children caught me hiding behind pine trees and ran to their parents, we decided I should stay inside and memorize Power Rangers morphing sequences. And this is what I did, until my new father grew frustrated at my mumbling strings of words, how I'd echo pterodactyl very fast, very loudly. He skipped the lecture the next morning and drove me to the testing center to get my school situation sorted. "The neighbors have been talking about you," he said, meaning my antics had drawn attention, confirming my existence. In America, he explained, children who exist are required to attend school. By this time, all the cold days had grown into one endless fog, and I couldn't tell if we had been in the country for weeks or months. The moment I stepped onto the school bus, I could see the other students had established routines and customs, friendships and enmities that, because I started school 3 months into the term, would remain inaccessible to me. After the teacher introduced me to my classmates, I did my best to dodge their curiosity about elephants and monkeys, and when my new father talked of visas and green cards, I allowed myself to dream about the full American me, how she would look like inquisitive Bethany, who loved her grandmother and glitter-stained hoodies, how she would sound like popular Christopher, who knew the lyrics to every Avril Lavigne song. In this way, the past became a shadow, an inconsequential ghost lurking in the hall, unable to touch me. Still, I jumped when Miss Keegan blew her whistle and startled again when the class responded in respectful fear. This was a new kind of discipline, my body seemed to be telling me, and I'd better get used to it. I also learned to relax, finding comfort in the promise of familiarity. I learned to play capture the flag and tetherball. I learned to eat chicken nuggets and tater tots. I loved the days when my mother and I stood behind the glass of the sub shop, learning the difference between provolone and cheddar, because here I could speak for my mother and she would pat my back and say she was so proud, so happy that I would soon pass for a real American girl. When I brought home library books, she would ask me to read to her. Slow down, she would say, when I tried to keep the pace I was taught in class, where instinct told me I had to be one of the best or else. When I obeyed and slowed, she mourned the lost pets and dead parents. When I brought home books about magic, she cried witch, so I had to remind her that the child wizard was an orphan, a circumstance to which she was sympathetic, suddenly finding a small reflection of herself where there seemed none before. In these moments, she would insist I write letters to her dead. One day, when I asked for names and faces, she paused, touched my mouth, and whispered a string of words, so familiar my chest ached, words so ancient I would never find the right translation, no matter how long and far I looked. Of course, my fruitless searching was something of a relief. New beginnings were ultimately about forgetting, the best kind of hiding. Comfort is fleeting. A warm sun in the last days of fall, after the honeymoon phase of welcome to America with the mall tours and the Costco samples and Chinese buffet dinners, my new father began to blame us for his poverty. Our presence had brought little luck and no relief, and he stopped asking about our day, choosing instead to wear his proud and brooding "I am the breadwinner" shirt, returning home late at night, red-eyed and irritable, the promise of control clinging to him like an addiction. By then, there was nowhere to run. We were dependents, my mother and I, we who did not recall how sour depending on others could be. Winter came. My mother despised the snow, but I was in awe of the white fluff, how it fell gracefully, only to end in mud, destined for sewage. It was our first exposure to such brutal cold, and we were trapped inside the gray box of my new father's apartment. I had school to distract me, but my mother didn't have papers to work. Her new husband wouldn't teach her to drive, so we never went anywhere. Most of the time, she flitted around the space, darkening the walls with her gloom. I preferred sitting on the swings behind the apartment building, especially when no other children were in sight. Alone at home, my mother sewed sweaters and shawls out of spare curtains and old bed sheets, then ventured into the nearby streets. She would go out when the sun was high for the heat, ignorant of the fact that we lived among retirees, grandmothers and grandfathers, a small but effective ring of vigilantes who perched at their windows with binoculars and walkie-talkies, scoping the streets for colorful birds and uninvited guests. Of course, none of them expected her to wave and flash her broken tooth smile to introduce herself. "My Nana wants to call security," said Bethany. "I heard the wild woman comes out of your place. You must know. Aren't you from the jungle?" "Yes," I said, leaning into the wildness I had inherited from my mother. "I come from a forest of talking giants and ivy-walled towers. There's a market in the meadow where headless women sell tongues to travelers. There's a well where you can draw up wishes at a cost. At the market's heart is an abandoned museum that once housed endangered creatures from forgotten corners of the world. Before it closed, the museum's main exhibit was a shapeshifter who could take any form, but one day he refused to turn, and no one would pay to see his true self, a wrinkled mass with mouths where eyes and ears should be. When he spoke, people gritted their teeth and covered their ears to avoid the scraping sounds of his voice. Rumor had it Bethany ran home. She didn't hear me out till the end. Not that it would have made a difference. I didn't think about softening the earth for the kids who would come after me. I didn't think about making anyone else's life easier. Stop going outside, I told my mother, relaying Bethany's message. But our neighbors love me, she said. I frowned. They wave back when I wave, she insisted, setting the table for dinner. They smile so big, but they look lonely too. My new father was home, calmed by a glass of wine and distracted by the flashing screen in front of him. I wasn't going to tell him about Bethany and the birdwatching spies, but he jerked at our chatter and demanded to hear the story, so I told it. My mother stopped speaking after he threatened to take away keys. The next day, he wrenched it from her fists. The official reason for the confiscation was that she had misplaced too many spares on her walks, that he couldn't afford any more replacements. Eventually, his friends and colleagues began inviting us to parties, birthdays, graduations, church. Appearances had to be made and smiles exchanged. He took me on the condition that when people asked after my mother, I told them she was recuperating. She'd fallen down the stairs, she sleepwalked into a wall. She wasn't yet used to the cold climate. Spouses and partners would also arrive as figurines came to the apartment to offer me and my mother advice. Loneliness was inevitable, they said. The side effects would run their course. Keep on keeping on, they would say. Do you mind ironing and cleaning? They asked. Do you braid? Anything, my mother said, desperate for company. Then come over, they said. We can find things to keep you occupied. She could go if they picked her up, but when she returned, my new father expressed his disapproval, saying how demeaning it was for her to clean houses and braid hair, how he had promised her so much more. At least wait till I finish my program, he pleaded, burying his empty hands. When he cried, she bowed her head and swallowed her hunger for air. She tried to show gratitude for the fresh start, but the only thanks she accepted was an absolute faith and obedience, two ingredients known to turn adults into compliant children. Once she went house to house with a rake and made $50. And when he came home to groceries in the kitchen, he roared and shook and would have broken the table if I hadn't reached out the last moment to remind him that we were renting. When he calmed, he reminded us that he was renting, and I said, yes, of course. And then he disappeared into the black mall of hallway, the slam of the bedroom door, a distant, detached sound. She was still getting to know the boundaries of her cage, living room, kitchen, hallway, all connected, and bedroom separated by a door. On lucky days, when she could find the key, she visited the McDonald's across the street. Outside the apartment gates were the bodega, the Shell station, and attached mini mart, the sub and pizza shop in front of my school, all beckoning her from the window of the living room. Beyond these was a dark, forbidden wood with walking trails accessible via bus. But she wouldn't venture farther out. She couldn't imagine getting lost in a foreign wood. I'm already lost enough, she said. Why did you come then? I snapped. Not we, I realized too late. You. I ran away before she could reply. I sat in the swing and watched the sun sink. I don't know how long I stayed there. My guilt paralyzed me. One day in March, the air was crisp, but promised to warm, the sun's brilliance elevating everyone's mood. My new father bought me a new backpack, a second lighter winter coat, and a pair of solid boots. He gave my mother the apartment keys and promised to teach her to drive. Her confidence renewed, she emerged from the shadows, volunteering to chaperone a school trip, a mock trial about the wolf and the three little pigs to be held at City Court. I was to play the wolf's lawyer. My mother took me to a thrift shop and dressed me in slacks and a fitted blazer. Then she invited my new father, who said he couldn't make it, but wanted me to know he was proud and had a movie recommendation that might help me prepare. And so the night before the trial, we watched A Few Good Men. In the morning, we spent half the ride to the courthouse playing Tom Cruise and shout whispering, "Did you order a code red?" We got side eyes from my classmates, the little pigs and their counsel, and a nervous smile from Miss Keegan. During the trial, I noticed my mother watching, her eyes big and proud. She would lean over to Bethany's mother, and Bethany's mother would lean over to her, and the two would point out and mutter their daughter's praises to one another. Right before my closing argument, I sought my mother's attention again. Perhaps I hoped to find some courage there, a jolt of confidence to stop the trembling in my legs. What I found instead, her eyes flitting from one parent to the other, her mouth mimicking the shape of theirs. I thought I saw her facial bones shifting beneath her skin, but I can't be sure. I looked away and shook my head, attempting to control my nerves. After the trial, I couldn't find her. The other parents flooded me with their big brain congratulations. You are so articulate, they said. Someday, you'll make a great real life lawyer. Where's your mom? Bethany's mother shouted over the crowd. I wanted us to take a picture. She doesn't like pictures, I muttered. Miss Keegan ushered us to a park for boxed lunches. I went to join my classmates in a pickup basketball game. Christopher passed the ball once, but I missed my chance, so I didn't see the ball again. When time came to board the bus, I looked everywhere for my mother. I wanted to run and find her, and I would have if Miss Keegan had not called my name then to tell me she had left with the other parents. I felt suddenly cold, exposed. I felt completely alone. Surely she had abandoned me. Why wouldn't she if she discovered a new and better form? Why would she wait for me when I had settled into my skin, when I had snapped at her, when I had made little effort to release her? When the bus dropped us off, I sprinted home, but she was not there. I went door to door. I knocked at Bethany's and was invited inside for a snack. My classmate was not around, and her grandmother called me over to play bingo. I stood on the threshold between their living and dining rooms, my eyes fixed on the blue crane figurine sitting between two portraits on the fireplace mantle. I didn't want to stay for snacks or dinner. I asked Bethany's Nana and her bingo pals if they had seen my wild mother. Not today, said the old woman. I returned to our apartment at nightfall, where I found her on the couch, her head slung back, her brow creased as if she were in pain. She'd covered her bruises with a blanket. I heard her bones creaking under the covering. I asked if she was okay. She nodded, patting the space beside her. I approached with caution, sat as far away as I could on the small couch. I'm sorry you don't have friends, she said. I want you to try harder, okay? I gaped, ashamed at her assessment. I attempted to leave. She latched onto my arm. Sit, she said, stay with me. She turned on the television and I prayed she would find something interesting to watch, if only to forget about me for a little while. Her favorite was Talking Tinkerbell and her fairy friends. She didn't care for the original Tinkerbell, couldn't stand to see her shake and jingle, separated from the rest of fairy kind, unable to make or keep a friend, other than that Peter and his manipulative shadow. All you have to do is believe, my mother mumbled her favorite line, even though that particular movie wasn't playing. I didn't know what was on. There was a girl with 80s hair slamming the front door on her parents. I hate you, the girl shouted on her way out. I hate you, my mother practiced. I hate you. I joined in her chanting, and the walls drew closer, a dome of inquisitive, half-formed faces. I echoed my mother, and the faces, which were wrinkled and round and stone, which had many mouths but no eyes, which were as familiar and unfamiliar as my mother tongue. Yes, those faces, well, they echoed back. I will stop there. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to say thank you to Nicole for this incredible reception, and also just welcoming us here, and the Kenyon Review. Thank you, Elizabeth and Tori and Abby and everyone else who isn't here. I'd like to thank my friends and family who are watching, everyone who helps me write and is like ready to talk through like my strange ideas. And most of all, I'd like to thank my mother, who is the reason I write. Thank you again for.
Thank you, Elinam, for sharing that work. Thank you, Christina, for sharing that work. Thank you both for sharing new work. I know that's not easy to do and feels particularly generous. The poem that you wrote today, I mean, that's wonderful. And brave. So thank you for all of that. We do have time right now for a Q&A. I hope you're up for that. Elizabeth, are there questions already from?
No questions here yet, but if the audience has questions, we're going to give you the microphone so that the people that are tuning in can hear you as well. Corey, I'm actually going to put you in charge. Who has questions?
Did you all want to? I think you should come up. I think so, because I think that everyone will be able to hear you better if you're near the microphone. I'll back up and give.
Christina, this is for you. Your first poem was wonderful, and I was curious as to what the inspiration was for that.
Trying to remember what the first poem.
Well, it was as if you were giving somebody permission to. You were taking somebody from very ill to gone. And I wondered if that was a personal experience or what might have been your inspiration for that.
Yeah, I think not all the poems I would say are autobiographical, but they're certainly deeply inspired by recent experience of loss. So in that poem, like I said, I think I'm trying to understand the many facets of grief that allow for something beyond it. In that piece, particularly, I was really interested in what sentences could do and what prose could do to clarify what it was I was wanting to convey emotionally. I think it can be really easy to get lost in the lyric motion of feelings, and I love to dwell there, but it's a lot harder sometimes to just say things. So I think my main inspiration was just trying to say what it was.
Yeah, it was the part of it that was the laying of the palms on the shoulders. Just struck me. That's a physical way of reminding somebody in pain of that you care about them. Personally, it seemed to be a form of giving somebody permission to go. And I thought that was beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah. So I actually have a question for both of you, which is, how did you find your calling to write? How did it find you?
Big question.
Well, like when I was young, my mother always told stories, and so stories I feel like just became a part of my language. Yeah, in the way that I sort of preserve memory. And I realized that was also her way of preserving memory. And yeah, and I didn't really decide to be a writer until I was in college. And I think that was just sort of learning that being a writer was an option. Yeah.
I've written in various forms, so I'm trying to think if the answer is true for all of them, but I think it is. I think I just had really big feelings and really big ideas that I needed to make sense of. So I would put them down in first in poems. I started writing poems first, but then stories also that maybe we'll see the light of day someday. But, I think there was something about the ability to feel like I was making a kind of music and poetry that was really freeing and just felt like a very beautiful container for the things that that were so frustrating for me. So yeah, I don't know that it was really a thinking act. I think it just happened, and I was very lucky also to have parents who appreciated stories and literature, and I had a lot of books around, and I learned how to read pretty early, so I always had interest in language, and just decided I would try it, and then didn't want to do anything else.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing both of your writing. Thank you.
So both of you have these strong sense of feeling. How do you get your feelings constrained by craft?
Do I get my feelings constrained by craft? I think that craft allows me to express them. So I don't think it's a constraint, but there is tension. And I think the tension allows me to make something interesting and exciting for me. So I do look, I guess, for a little bit of rebuttal from the form that I'm entering or whatever's happening on the page. I do, I guess, in a sense, look for a way out of things and into things, but I don't ever feel trapped in the writing. I feel liberated in the writing, but it's a complicated process. So there is a lot of tension, and there are a lot of walls and windows, like I said, to be built. So
Yeah, I agree with that. I was recently telling my students to think about whatever form they were writing as some kind of shape. So a house, a room, and just thinking about it now, it's a really good question. And I think about, I often feel that like there's too much going on in my head and feel too many feelings, I suppose, and lots of other things. And I think writing is sort of this place where there's the possibility of control. So even if it's, difficult to find that shape and difficult to find something to contain it, I love use the word container there. Yeah, even if it's difficult, I think there's just sort of, it's like not a space that I'm afraid of, and I'm always excited to kind of return to it. And I feel like when I'm most miserable about writing or complaining about writing, it's like I'm reminded that it's when I'm not looking at the page. It's every other time. So yeah, I think it is like a place to, yeah, like have even like a little bit of like being able to order things in a way that makes sense when life doesn't. Yeah.
Are there other questions? Because I've got questions. I've always got questions. Okay, my question is for both of you. I'm curious, as you are you're in an intense kind of situation, and the world's an intense situation. And so I'm wondering what kind of where are you drawing your inspiration from? Who do you love? What are you listening to? And I'm thinking specifically right now, like we just lost Camila Aisha Moon, this really beautiful poet, gorgeous human. And so I am just like right now in this like late 90s R&B, like forever with her, right? So that's what I'm listening to, and that's what's giving me some life right now. But I'm curious what's inspiring for you both.
So on the way here, I was playing some Avril Lavigne to kind of establish mood for Christina. I think recently put together like an anime openings and soundtrack playlist that was relaxing. I feel like reading reading just like work that makes me excited, and watching films that sometimes like I think I just need to be sad. Like and I was recently having a conversation with one of my colleagues about just like the difference between being sad alone with like no one and watching something and knowing that other people are also watching it and feeling sad about that thing that is external to you, which is a different experience, feels a little bit healthier. So yeah, I think I've been trying to do more of that.
I feel like I've been just having this sampler plate of poems and stories and not, is that a creature? I don't know if that came through the microphone. It was like a little owl noise or something. Actually, that was very helpful, whatever that was, because it made me remember the real soundtrack for me right now is Gambier, is the noises, the nature sounds. I have actually been befriending an owl from afar, but that sound has actually provided a lot of comfort for me. I can't really say why. It just has been really helpful to hear kind of the animal sounds of quiet, if that makes any sense. But in terms of media that I'm absorbing, today I listened to Alice Coltrane, and it was really helpful to hear just a really kind of spacey sound that is also very opening. It was really helpful to me to get into a place where I could share work. And I'm reading with my students. We're reading Jamaica Kincaid right now, and soon we'll be reading Banu Kapil. And I think that everything that I'm interested in attending to in terms of media isn't necessarily to help me make sense of what's happening in the world, because I don't know that there is a logic. Really, it almost feels dangerous to try to make a logic of what's happening in so many respects. There's so many things happening in the world that feel just incredibly heavy and incredibly abundant. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm trying to slow down my practice of witnessing, and those pieces of media and those practices with what's just happening around me are really helpful for that.
Hi, I'm Audrey. Very nice to hear you all read. Oh, how, I don't know how, I'm in my room, obviously, so I don't know where my voice is coming from in the room, but it looks like it's very exciting. So I have a question for you, Elinam. I'm really interested in how you were talking about form and the shape of a piece. And I was wondering if the book that you read from has a shape?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think the way I've been thinking about it is that sometimes with drafting, I just need to get what the story, like the general arc of a story out, or feelings out, and then I think the shape, the act of structuring. Sorry, I shouldn't be looking up. I'm sorry, it's like the speaker. But the sound of the act of structuring is something that happens more in revision, when I return to what I've written again and again, and also when I read other things and think about what my work is in conversation with. And and I currently, I don't think I know what the shape of this book is, but I think it's like the image in my head that I received, I feel, from a conversation with a poet friend who I have like the longest conversations with, was this idea of reaching into a mouth, and pulling someone out. And I had just like, that's like the image that stuck with me. I don't know how that would form eventually, but I'm excited to see where it goes. Thank you for the question.
That was from Audrey Mueller, and we also have a question from Molly Fording.
Hi, first, thank you for the readings. Those were both beautiful. I really enjoyed them. My question is for both of you. What is the best book you've read recently? I'm always interested in what writers are reading.
This week, my class read Autobiography of Red by Anne Carson. I mean, I've read it a few times, and I feel like it's just one of those books that each time I read it, I take something new out of it. So I'm reading that, and I'm also currently reading Liberty by Caitlin Greenidge, which I'm loving. It's just like hitting all of my narrative interests.
Like I said, I'm reading alongside my students. So we're reading Jamaica Kincaid's At the Bottom of the River. We're reading Banu Kapil's Schizophrene. We're also reading a little bit from The Art of Death by Edwidge Danticat. So more literary essays, but they're just, she's such an incredible writer that she's able to weave in so much beyond the analysis. And they've been very instructive for me, actually, in my poems. What else am I reading? Reading a lot for the review, student work. I would love to be reading more, full-on collections, but I find myself actually, when I'm in moments of doing a lot of other kinds of reading, revisiting works. So I'm also revisiting an essay collection called Sidewalks by Valeria Luiselli. That also is very instructive for my poems. I for whatever reason, essays are very helpful to me as a poet. So I don't have a super long list of new and exciting things, unfortunately, but there are a lot of wonderful writers to look at. And I think one of them might be actually watching my friend Lathan Osman's book, Exits of Eden, is a wonderful collection that you should be looking for. And there's so many. There are just a million books that came out in the past year, couple years, that didn't get a lot of love because we're all sort of behind screens, and they didn't get to go out into the world and be books in the ways that they usually are. So I recommend reading all of the lists and reading all of those books.
I think it's time to wrap up. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank the folks who are joining us remotely, virtually, for joining us, and thank Elizabeth for making it happen, Ocean for making it real, Tori for organizing and helping, Abby for general wizardry, and fellows for sharing their work. Thank you all so much.